The first time Jack saw the sickness, it had a name. Dave. Dave Schuster, a third-shift hydroponics tech, who owed Jack 20 credits and always smelled faintly of synthetic soil. Jack was down in the sub-level conduits of Station Epsilon, chasing a power fluctuation that was making the lights in the rec room flicker like a dying firefly. The air was thick with the smells of ozone and hot metal, a smell Jack knew better than his own daughter's shampoo. He found the junction box and he found Dave. Dave was sitting on the grated floor, cross-legged, humming. That was the first wrong thing. Dave didn't hum. He whistled, usually some flat, forgotten tune from a movie, made back on Earth centuries ago. This was a low, single-note hum, a thrumming sound that seemed to vibrate in Jack's teeth. In Dave's hand was a standard-issue multi-tool, the screwdriver bit extended. "Dave," Jack called out, his voice echoing in the narrow corridor. "You good? Command sent me to check this junction. We got a brownout in Sector Gamma." Dave didn't turn, he just kept humming, his head tilted, as if listening to a secret only he could hear. His coveralls were clean, his boots were scuffed. Everything about him was normal except for the look in his eyes. They were wide and staring at the grimy wall, as if it were a window to heaven. "It's the noise," Dave said, his voice a dry rasp. "It won't stop. The whole station, the whole galaxy, it's screaming." Jack took a step closer. "What noise, buddy?" "All I hear is the life support recycler. Same as always." "Number not that noise, the other one. The human one." Dave's eyes finally swiveled to meet Jack's. They were frantic, terrified. "We're too loud, Jackie. We're shouting in a library. They can hear us. They've always been able to hear us." A cold knot formed in Jack's stomach. Space psychosis wasn't common, but it wasn't unheard of. The endless dark, the recycled air, the knowledge that you were a fragile bag of water sealed in a tin can, millions of miles from anything solid. It could break a person. "Okay, Dave, let's get you up to Med Bay," Jack said, keeping his voice calm and even. "They can give you something to help you sleep, quiet things down." "Quiet," Dave repeated, and a sick kind of smile spread across his face. "Yes, quiet. I know how to make it quiet." Before Jack could react, Dave moved with a speed that was horrifying. He jammed the screwdriver into his own ear, not tentatively. He pushed it in hard, a wet, crunching sound turning Jack's blood to ice. Dave grunted, a thick line of red running down his neck, and twisted the tool. "Gotta let the quiet in," he gasped, his eyes rolling back in his head. "Gotta stop the screaming." Jack lunged, grabbing Dave's arm, wrestling the multi-tool away. It was slick with blood. Dave fought him, not with anger, but with a desperate, single-minded purpose. He wasn't trying to hurt Jack. He was trying to get back to his task of self-mutilation. Jack was stronger. He pinned Dave to the floor, his knee on his chest, shouting into his comm for a security team and a medtech, his voice shaking. The security team arrived, their faces grim. They sedated Dave, who went limp like a puppet with its strings cut. As they loaded him onto a grave stretcher, his eyes fluttered open one last time and found Jack's. "It's a fever," Dave whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "We're the fever, and the body is starting to sweat." Then they took him away and Jack was left alone in the conduit corridor. The power was still fluctuating. The junction box was still open. But all he could hear was the echo of Dave's words and the low, steady hum of the station's life support, which suddenly sounded very, very loud. He looked down at the blood on the floor, a dark stain on the metal grate. It looked wrong. It looked like a symptom. The official report called it an acute psychotic break, spacer's madness, cabin fever's ugly cousin. The station commander, Eva Rostova, issued a memo reminding everyone of the importance of mental health checks and utilizing the station's counselors. Dave Schuster was stabilized and would be shipped back to the core systems for advanced treatment on the next supply freighter. Case closed, except it wasn't. For Jack, the case was wide open, bleeding on the floor of his memory. He couldn't get the sound out of his head, the wet crunch of the screwdriver. He couldn't forget the look in Dave's eyes, that terrifying clarity. It wasn't madness. It was revelation. He found Maria in the docking bay, leaning against a cargo container that smelled of industrial solvents and ozone. Maria ran a small, independent freighter, the Rust Bucket, hauling specialty ores and equipment between the outer rim stations. She had seen more of the void than anyone Jack knew. Her face was a roadmap of busted capillaries from cheap station booze. And her hair was a tangled mess she kept tied back with a greasy rag. She was also the most pragmatic person he'd ever met. "Heard about your boy Dave," she said, not looking at him, just taking a long drag from a nicotine vaporizer. "Nasty business." "It was more than nasty, Maria," Jack said, leaning beside her. He was saying things, crazy things, that we were a noise, a disease. Maria finally turned to look at him, her eyes narrowed. "He's not the first." The cold knot in Jack's stomach, the one that had formed in the conduit, tightened. "What do you mean?" "Last month on Proxima T, a geologist walked out of the airlock without a suit. Said she wanted to feel the silence. 2 weeks before that, on Ganymede Port, a pilot tried to fly his ship directly into Jupiter. Kept screaming over the comms about sterilizing the infection." She took another puff from her vape. "The Corps are hushing it up, calling it isolated incidents, but when you connect the dots, it ain't a bunch of dots anymore. It's a line." Jack felt a prickle of sweat on his neck. A line to what? "Don't know. Don't want to know." Maria flicked a switch on her vaporizer, and the tip glowed an angry red. "There are stories, Jackie. Old space's tales. That humanity expanded too fast, too far. That we're not alone out here, we're just the loudest. The talk is that the old races, the ones that have been around for billions of years, they put up a fence. A quarantine. A quarantine." The word sounded absurd. You can't quarantine a species that's on 100 worlds. "Maybe you can," Maria said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Maybe it's not a wall of ships and lasers. Maybe it's something else. Something that gets in your head. Something that makes you want to stop." Jack thought of Dave's hum. The single low note. He had assumed it was just a sound Dave was making. But what if he was repeating something? What if he was hearing a frequency that Jack couldn't? He spent his days diagnosing signal interference and chasing gremlins in the station's wiring. The idea of a hidden signal wasn't far-fetched. It was terrifyingly plausible. "People are scared," Maria continued, her tough facade cracking just a little. "Cargo manifests are getting lost. Ships are being delayed for maintenance. It feels like they're tightening the leash, trying to keep us from moving around too much. From spreading whatever this is." Jack looked out through the docking bay's massive reinforced window. Station Epsilon was just a tiny speck of light and metal, clinging to a giant rock that was hurtling through an infinite silent blackness. For the first time in his life, the emptiness didn't feel empty. It felt like it was watching. It felt like it was listening. And it didn't like what it heard. He could almost feel a low vibration through the soles of his boots. A hum so deep, it was more a feeling than a sound. Or maybe it was just his imagination. He hoped it was just his imagination. He hoped it was just his imagination. Jack's universe had shrunk over the years. First to Earth, then to the transport that took him off-world, then to Station Epsilon, and finally to the small two-room habitat he shared with his daughter. Lily was 12. She had her mother's dark eyes and his own stubborn chin. Her mother, Sarah, was a memory, a ghost, lost to a pressure leak on a prospecting ship 7 years ago. Now it was just Jack and Lily against the void. His entire world was contained within her bright, curious smile. Lately, that world had started to feel strange. He came home from his shift, the conversation with Mariah echoing in his head, and found Lily at their small galley table. She wasn't doing her schoolwork or watching a cartoon on her daypad. She was drawing. He looked over her shoulder. The page was filled with stark geometric shapes. Long, clean lines and perfect circles, arranged in a pattern that was cold and sterile. "What's that, sweetie?" he asked, forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. "Some new kind of starship." Lily didn't look up. "It's a quiet place," she said, her voice soft. She took a gray crayon and began to fill in the space between two lines. No people, no talking, no noise. A chill traced its way down Jack's spine. "Don't you like people?" "They're messy," she said, still focused on her drawing. "And loud." This was new. Lily was a social butterfly. She had friends all over the station, kids of other workers. They would run through the corridors, their laughter echoing, a sound that always made Jack smile. Messy and loud was Lily's natural state. He sat down opposite her. He noticed her data pad was on, but the screen was black. He could see a faint waveform moving across it, the kind of display his own diagnostic tools used. "What are you listening to?" he asked. "Nothing," she said quickly, a little too quickly, and swiped the screen off. "Just static." The word hung in the air. Static. Jack spent half his life filtering out static to find clear signals. He knew it wasn't nothing. Static was what you called the noise you didn't understand. That night he woke up to a sound from her room. It wasn't a nightmare, not the crying he was used to soothing. It was a hum, a low, single-note hum. The same one Dave had been making in the conduit. He pushed her door open a crack. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the starfield outside her viewport. Lily was sitting up in her bed, her back ramrod straight, facing the window. She was humming. It was a pure, steady tone, unwavering, almost mechanical. It made the hairs on his arms stand up. "Lily?" he whispered. The humming stopped. She turned, and in the dim light he couldn't read her expression. "I was just singing, Daddy." "What song is that, sweetie? I've never heard it before." "It's not a song," she said, and her voice was a little too old, a little too calm for a 12-year-old woken from sleep. "It's the opposite of a song." He tucked her back in, kissed her forehead. Her skin felt cool. He tried to tell himself it was nothing. Kids were weird. They picked up strange habits. But as he walked back to his own room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had gotten into his home. Something had found its way past the station's hull, past the airlocks, past the layers of metal and radiation shielding. It had found the one part of his universe he couldn't bear to lose. He stood in his dark room for a long time, listening. He listened for the hum from her room, for the thrum of the station, for the noise of life. All he could hear was a profound and terrifying silence that seemed to be growing, swallowing all the other sounds whole. The psychosis cases, as they were still officially called, became a weekly occurrence. A cook in the mess hall methodically smashing every plate, saying they were too ornate. A pipe fitter found sitting in a sealed-off maintenance shaft, having removed his comm unit and filled his ears with insulation foam. Each incident was followed by a calm, reassuring, station-wide broadcast from Commander Rostova. Her face appeared on every screen, from the large displays in the common areas to the small daypad in Jack's habitat. She was a woman carved from granite, her face severe, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She spoke of the psychological pressures of deep space, of resource scarcity, of the need for communal strength. Her words were a balm, meant to soothe, but to Jack, they sounded like lies. "We are a community," Rostova said, her voice even and controlled. "And like any community, we face challenges. I want to assure you that Station Epsilon is secure. Our medical staff is top-notch. These isolated incidents are being handled with the utmost care and professionalism. Adhere to protocols. Trust in the command structure. We will endure." Jack watched the broadcast in the noisy engineer's lounge, surrounded by his colleagues. Most of them nodded along, their faces showing a mixture of concern and relief. They wanted to believe her. It was easier to believe in a few broken minds than in a broken universe. But Jack saw the flicker of sweat on Rostova's upper lip. He saw the way her eyes, for a split second, darted off screen. As if listening to someone or something he couldn't see, she was performing. And her performance was wearing thin. The hum, as he now called it in his mind, was no longer his imagination. It was real. He started catching it at the edges of his hearing, a low-frequency thrum that hid beneath the clatter and whir of the station. It was like a bass note played so low you felt it in your bones more than you heard it with your ears. He started carrying a portable spectrum analyzer with him, a tool normally used for finding comms interference. He'd hold it up in quiet corridors, in storage closets, in the dead of the station's night cycle. And he found it. It was a ghost on the screen, a tiny, persistent spike at the very bottom of the frequency range. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It wasn't engine vibration or a quirk in the power grid. It was a signal. It was faint, structured, and deliberate. It was being broadcast from somewhere outside the station. It was aimed directly at them. He felt a jolt of vindication followed by a wave of pure terror. Maria was right. Dave was right. This wasn't madness. This was a broadcast, a signal designed to do what? Make people want to jam screwdrivers in their ears, make them crave a terrifying empty silence. He took his findings to his direct supervisor, a portly man named Gregor, who cared more about his pension than the station's power grid. Jack laid it all out on Gregor's desk, the datard showing the anomalous signal. Gregor squinted at the screen, then looked at Jack over the top of his glasses. "It's resonance from the asteroid's core, Heston. Nothing to worry about. I've seen it before." "No, sir," Jack insisted. "Resonance is random. This is a pattern signal. It has a rhythm, a cadence." "You sound like Schuster," Gregor said, his voice laced with warning. "You are stressed. We're all stressed. Take the next cycle off. Go spend time with your daughter. That's an order." Jack left Gregor's office, his fists clenched. They weren't just hushing it up. They were actively denying it. The command structure wasn't there to protect them. It was there to manage them. To keep the herd calm as it was led, dazzle somewhere. That night he couldn't sleep. The hum felt louder than ever. He went to Lily's room. She was asleep, but her data pad was on, tucked under her pillow. He gently slid it out. The screen was active, displaying the same waveform he had seen on his analyzer. But it wasn't just a static display, it was an app. A meditation app he'd never seen before. It had been pushed to all the station's personal devices in a recent system update. The app's description read, "Find your inner quiet. Tune out the noise of life and discover the harmony of the void." The harmony of the void, the opposite of a song. He wasn't just hearing a signal. The station was actively piping it into their homes, into their ears, disguised as a wellness tool. They weren't being attacked. They were being medicated. Jack felt like a man trying to shout in a vacuum. He knew the truth, or at least a terrifying piece of it. But no one would listen. His attempts to warn others were met with suspicion or pity. He was stressed. He was grieving. He was letting his imagination run away with him. He was becoming the boy who cried wolf on a station full of sheep. He retreated to the only place he felt he had any control, the guts of the station. He spent his off hours in the comms relay center, a cramped, humming room filled with servers and blinking lights. He told Gregor he was running deep-level diagnostics. In reality, he was trying to catch a ghost. He knew the signal was there, but it was weak, buried under layers of encryption and station-generated noise. It was like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane. He needed to amplify it, to clean it up. He jury-rigged a cascade of filters, rerouting power from non-essential systems, risking his job with every connection he made. For 2 sleep-deprived cycles he worked, fueled by stale coffee and a growing sense of dread. And then he got it. He isolated the signal, stripping away everything else. He channeled it, not as audio, but as raw data. He expected a language, something he could feed into a translation matrix. He expected words, a message from an alien race saying, "Get off our lawn," or "We come in peace." He was wrong. What flooded his screen was not language. It was pure, unadulterated concept. It was mathematics, biology, and philosophy, all woven into a single terrifying tapestry of information. There were no words, only ideas, transmitted with the cold, irrefutable logic of a physics equation. The core message was simple, and it hit Jack with the force of a physical blow. It described the universe not as empty space dotted with matter, but as a single complex organism, a body. Galaxies were its organs, stars its cells. And life, the kind of noisy, chaotic, ever-expanding life that humanity represented, was a fever, an anomaly, a pathogen. The broadcast showed humanity spread through the stars, not as a glorious expansion, but as a time-lapse video of a mold creeping across a piece of fruit. It showed our cities, our ships, our terraforming projects as scars, as lesions on the skin of planets. Our art, our music, our arguments, our laughter, our endless chatter, it was all portrayed as a discordant, painful noise, a screaming. The signal was not a declaration of war. It was a treatment protocol. You are a discordant note in the song of existence. You are a fever in the body of the universe. The body is now regulating its temperature. The hum was the medicine, a psychoactive frequency designed to quell the symptoms of the human disease. It targeted the very things that made them human: ambition, creativity, emotion, connection. It was designed to make them quiet, to make them still, to turn the shouting in the library into a respectful silence. Jack stumbled back from the console, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt dizzy, sick. It was worse than he could have ever imagined. They weren't facing an enemy they could fight. They were facing a doctor who saw them as a sickness. How do you fight a cure? The worst part was a sliver of the broadcast that felt personal. It showed images of a world, pristine and calm. A world of green plains and silent silver rivers. And then it showed a single human footprint appearing in the soft soil. And from that footprint a dark stain, a corruption, began to spread, turning the green to brown, the silver to gray. It felt like an accusation. He thought of Dave Schuster jamming a screwdriver in his ear to let the quiet in. He hadn't been insane. He had understood the message perfectly. He was trying to cooperate with the treatment. He stumbled out of the comms relay, leaving the screen glowing with its terrible revelation. The station corridors seemed different now. The people hurrying past, laughing, arguing, living, they all looked like patients who didn't know they were sick. And the cure was already in their veins, humming softly in their minds, patiently waiting to cool the fever for good. He had to get to Lily. He had to get her away from the medicine. The change on Station Epsilon was not sudden. It was a slow fade, like a photograph left in the sun. The vibrant, chaotic noise of several thousand people living on top of each other began to thin out. There were fewer arguments in the mess hall. The boisterous card games in the rec room dwindled. The corridors grew quieter. At first, people called it a relief. Finally, some peace and quiet around here, someone would say, and others would nod in agreement. But the peace was hollow. The quiet was empty. Jack saw the symptoms everywhere, now that he knew what to look for. He saw a cargo handler stare at a loading manifest. For 10 minutes, his eyes glazed over, before simply walking away, leaving the cargo sitting on the deck. He saw a group of off-duty miners sitting at a table, not talking, not playing cards, just staring at the wall, their expressions serene and vacant. They weren't sad. They weren't anything. They were just allow. The hum was taking root. The treatment was working. The most terrifying changes were the small ones. People stopped personalizing their living quarters. The colorful posters, the family photos, the little trinkets from home, they started to disappear. Habitats became uniform, sterile, like hospital rooms. People stopped eating for pleasure, consuming only the nutrient paste required for survival, their faces showing no enjoyment, no distaste. They were just refueling. Jack's fear became a constant, metallic taste in his mouth. He tried to fight it in his own small way. He brought home Lily's favorite meal, a synthetic noodle dish with extra spice flavoring. She ate it mechanically without comment. "Is it good, sweetie?" he asked, his voice sounding too loud in their quiet apartment. "It is adequate for my nutritional needs," she replied, her eyes fixed on the wall behind him. The words, so clinical, so unlike her, were like a punch to the gut. He looked at her drawings, which were no longer just on paper. She had started drawing the cold, empty landscapes on the walls of her room with a black marker. Clean lines, perfect, sterile shapes. He tried to talk to her about her friends, about school, about anything that used to make her light up. Her answers were short, logical, and devoid of all emotion. She was being cured. He forbade her from using the meditation app, but he knew it was too late. The signal was in the air, in the walls, a constant, subliminal whisper. It was like trying to keep a fish from getting wet. His desperation led him back to Maria. He found her on the rust bucket, running frantic, low-level diagnostics. Her usual cynical calm was gone, replaced by a raw animal panic. They won't let me leave, she said, not even looking up from her console. Her hands were shaking. My clearance was revoked, pending a system-wide maintenance review. That's what they told me. It's a lie, Jackie. A goddamn lie. They're locking us in. The quarantine, Jack said, his voice flat. It's real, she whispered, finally looking at him. Her eyes were wide with fear. They're sealing the box. Whatever this sickness is, they're not letting it spread. It's not a sickness, Maria, Jack said, the words feeling heavy and dead in his mouth. He told her everything. About the signal, about the message, about the universe being a body, and humanity being a fever. She listened, her face growing paler with every word. She didn't call him crazy. She had seen too much on the outer rim to dismiss anything anymore. When he was done, she just stared at him, her tough exterior completely shattered. They're turning us off, Jack said, making us quiet, harmless. He thought of the cook smashing the ornate plates, of the pipe fitter wanting silence. They weren't going mad. They were purging themselves of the unnecessary complexities of being human. They were simplifying, becoming part of the harmony of the void. Maria stood up and walked to the ship's small viewport, looking out at the docking bay. The usual hustle and bustle was gone. A few station personnel moved about, their motions slow, deliberate, without purpose, like sleepwalkers. My ship, Maria said, her hand resting on the cold glass. It's a piece of junk, but it can fly. It's my way out. She turned to Jack, a flicker of her old fire returning to her eyes. They can lock down the station, but this old girl has a few tricks they don't know about. I can bypass their docking clamps. I can get us out of here. Out where? Jack asked, a sliver of hope cutting through his despair. Where can we go? Anywhere but here, she said, her voice hard. I don't know if we can outrun a ghost in the machine, Jackie, but I am not going to sit here and let them turn me into a goddamn houseplant. The choice was simple. Stay and watch his daughter fade into a serene, empty shell. Or run. Run into a galaxy that hated them, a galaxy that was actively trying to erase them. It wasn't much of a choice at all. The plan was born from desperation and fueled by cheap, potent coffee from Maria's private stash. It was a flimsy, ragged thing, full of holes and dependent on luck. But it was better than the alternative, which was to do nothing and wait for the quiet to claim them completely. The station's command structure is falling apart, Maria explained, hunched over a schematic of Station Epsilon spread across the galley table of the rust bucket. Not from panic, but from apathy. Rostova is still giving orders, but the people carrying them out are slow, Distracted. We used that. The plan had 3 parts. First, Jack needed to create a diversion. A big one. Something that would draw the station's remaining loyal security forces to the opposite end of the station. Second, Maria needed to prep the rust bucket for a hot launch, bypassing all the standard pre-flight protocols and docking clamps that had her ship pinned to the station like a butterfly in a display case. Third and most difficult, Jack had to get Lily from their habitat to the docking bay without raising suspicion. The diversion is easy, Jack said, pointing to a section of the schematic. The main power conduit for the ore processing facility. I can create a feedback loop that will simulate a reactor overload. It won't actually blow, but every alarm on this rock will go off. And protocol dictates they send every available hand to contain it. Good, Maria grunted, circling the docking bay on the schematic. That'll give me the window I need. Bypassing the clamps is noisy. I need cover. The third part was the one that made Jack's stomach clench. Lily. How is she? Maria asked, her voice gentler than he was used to. She's quiet, Jack said, the word tasting like ash. She barely talks. She just sits in her room drawing those patterns. But she'll come with me. I think she still trusts me. I hope she does. He returned to his habitat feeling like a ghost. The station's corridors were eerily silent. He passed people he'd known for years and they looked right through him, their eyes focused on something distant. They weren't hostile. They were just absent. The cure was working faster now. The fever was breaking. He found Lily in her room humming. That same awful single-note hum. She was tracing one of her geometric patterns on the wall with her finger. Hey, sweetie, he said, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. We're going to play a game. She turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. A game? Yeah, it's called Silent Run. We have to get from here to Maria's ship without anyone seeing us. We have to be very, very quiet. Can you do that? For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of the old Lily in her eyes, a spark of curiosity. Okay, Daddy, she said. Her voice was flat, but she said Daddy. The word was a lifeline. He packed a small bag with water packs, nutrient bars, and Lily's old, worn teddy bear, a relic from a time before the quiet. She looked at the bear with disinterest, but she let him put it in the bag. The plan was set for the start of the next Alpha shift, when the station was at its busiest, or what passed for busy these days. Jack used his master access codes to log into the power grid controls from his habitat's terminal. His fingers hovered over the command line that would start the overload sequence. This was it. There was no turning back. If they were caught, they wouldn't be sent to the core systems for treatment. They would be seen as contaminants, active carriers of the disease. Resisting the cure, he didn't know what Rostova would do, but he knew it wouldn't be pleasant. He looked at Lily, who was standing by the door, her hand in his. She was perfectly still, perfectly silent. He was doing this for her, to save her from the peace, to save her from the harmony of the void. He was choosing the chaos, the messiness, the loudness of being human. He took a deep breath and hit enter. Across the station, a klaxon began to wail. Red lights bathed the corridor in a hellish glow. An automated voice, calm and detached, announced a reactor containment failure in the processing sector. Time to go, sweetie, Jack said, pulling Lily into the corridor. Let's play the game. The station was a nightmare of organized chaos. The alarms blared, a frantic, shrieking counterpoint to the insidious hum that still vibrated beneath it all. Red emergency lights strobed. making the silent, slow-moving figures in the hallways look like demons in a cheap horror film. Jack kept Lily's hand locked in his, pulling her along. The diversion was working. Security personnel and engineers, the ones still functional enough to respond to duty, were hurrying in the opposite direction, towards the phantom reactor. Failure. But the other residents, the ones deep into the treatment, were the real obstacles. They didn't try to stop them, they were simply in the way. They stood in the middle of corridors, staring at the flashing lights with placid curiosity. They shuffled slowly, aimlessly, forcing Jack and Lily to weave around them. It was like running through a field of sleepwalkers. One man, a hydroponics tech, Jack recognized, stood facing a wall, gently patting it, as if calming a frightened animal. The sight was more terrifying than any monster. "This way," Jack whispered, pulling Lily down a service ladder into the maintenance conduits he knew so well. It was darker here, quieter. The main alarms were muffled, and for a moment, the only sounds were their footsteps on the metal grating and their own ragged breaths. "Are we winning the game, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice a small flat echo in the darkness. "We're doing great, sweetie," Jack lied, his heart pounding. "Almost there." They emerged from the conduits into a cargo transfer area near the docking bay. The path was clear. He could see the large bay doors at the end of the hall. He could almost smell the freedom. And then a voice cut through the noise. "Heston, stop right there." Commander Rostova stood blocking their path. She wasn't flanked by security guards. She was alone. She wasn't holding a weapon. She just stood there, her hands clasped behind her back, her face a mask of weary resignation. "Shut down the alarm, Jack," she said, her voice tired. "There is no reactor failure. I know what you did." "Then you know why I am doing it," Jack shot back, pulling Lily behind him protectively. "I do," Rostova said, and for the first time, Jack saw a crack in her granite facade. He saw profound sadness in her eyes. "I've known about the signal for 6 months. I've been sending reports to the core systems. The report stopped being answered 2 months ago. The core is already quiet, Jack. We're one of the last." The words hit him like a physical blow. The core systems. Billions of people. Quiet. "You are just letting it happen?" he demanded, his voice thick with disbelief. "You are their warden. You are helping them do this to us?" "Helping." Rostova let out a short, bitter laugh. "You can't help a tsunami, Jack. You can only watch it wash over you. The signal isn't an attack. It's a fundamental property of the universe, one we are uniquely, fatally susceptible to. Fighting it is like fighting gravity." "I have to try," Jack said, his grip on Lily's hand tightening. "For her." "And what will you give her?" Rostova took a step forward. "A life on the run, hiding in the dark corners of a galaxy that is actively trying to tranquilize you. Here, there is peace. There is no more pain, no more fear, no more ambition that leads to ruin. They are simply offering us a quiet end." From the docking bay behind them came a loud clang, followed by the hiss of hydraulic pressure. Maria was breaking free. "It's not an end, it's an erasure," Jack yelled, starting to back away towards the sound. "I won't let you turn my daughter into a ghost." "She already is," Rostova said, her voice filled with a chilling pity. She looked past Jack at Lily. "Isn't it peaceful, child? The quiet? Don't you want your father to feel the peace too?" Lily stepped out from behind Jack. She looked at Rostova and then up at Jack. Her face was blank, her eyes distant. "It's so loud, Daddy," she whispered. the alarm, and your heart. It's too loud. Rostova didn't move to stop them. She just watched with those sad, defeated eyes as Jack pulled his daughter away, towards the noise and the chaos of the escaping ship. Her inaction was more damning than any attack. It was the look of a doctor watching a patient refuse a cure, knowing the disease would only lead to a more painful end. The air inside the rust bucket was stale and tasted of fear. Maria was strapped into the pilot's seat, her knuckles white as she wrestled with the controls. The small freighter shuddered and groaned as it tore free from the last of Station Epsilon's docking clamps. Alarms blared on her console, a cacophony of protest from the ship's abused systems. "Strap in," she yelled over the noise. "This is gonna be rough." Jack fumbled with the co-pilot's harness, his hands shaking. He pulled a terrified Lily into the seat beside him, securing her restraints. She didn't resist. She just stared out the main viewport at the station, which was shrinking rapidly behind them. It looked like a discarded toy, all blinking red lights and silent screaming alarms. A place of quiet madness. "We're free," Jack gasped, a wave of relief washing over him. Maria let out a ragged laugh. "We're not free. We're just loose. Here is a difference." As the rust bucket cleared the station's immediate vicinity and the asteroid's shadow, the galaxy opened up before them. A vast, breathtaking tapestry of stars and nebulae, smeared across an infinite black canvas. It was beautiful. And for the first time in his life, it looked utterly hostile. Then, a new light blinked on Maria's console. It wasn't an alarm. It was an incoming transmission. A universal frequency, open channel. "What is it?" Jack asked. "It's galaxy-wide," Maria said, her voice hushed with awe and terror. "Patching it through." A voice filled the cockpit. It was not human. It wasn't menacing or angry. It was calm, gentle, and impossibly ancient. It sounded like a patient teacher or a kind doctor. The voice didn't speak a language of words, but like the signal Jack had decoded, it projected pure concept, which their ship's computer translated into the closest possible human equivalent. "This message is for the transient pathogen designated humanity," the voice began, serene and unfeeling. The voice began serene and unfeeling. "The body of this cosmic vessel has identified your species as a febrile anomaly. Your uncontrolled growth, your chaotic energy signatures, your discordant communications, they are symptoms of a systemic illness." The screen beside the console flickered to life, showing images from across human-occupied space. It showed New Terra, the bustling capital of the core systems, its vibrant streets now still and silent. Crowds of people stood motionless in the plazas, staring up at the sky. It showed the great orbital shipyards of Mars, the welding torches dark, the massive ships unfinished, floating like skeletons. It showed colony worlds, once thriving hubs of activity, now as quiet as paintings. "Do not be alarmed," the voice continued, its gentleness more terrifying than any threat. "This is not a punishment. It is a palliative measure, a therapy. The body must heal, the fever must break." The screen showed close-ups of the people. Their faces were calm, peaceful. There was no fear, no suffering. Their eyes were open but vacant. They were alive, breathing, but the spark, the fire, the humanity was gone. They were like the people on Station Epsilon. Only the process was complete. They had been cured. The treatment is a simple harmonic resonance. The physician, as it called itself, explained. It aligns your frantic neurological patterns with the baseline tranquility of the cosmos. It dampens the anxieties, the ambitions, the emotions that cause your species to burn so brightly and so destructively. It does not extinguish the flame. It merely banks the fire to a soft, harmless glow. Harmless, that was the word. They weren't being exterminated. They were being rendered harmless, turned from a raging wildfire into a field of placid, unthinking wildflowers. The horror wasn't death. The horror was the removal of the soul. Jack felt sick. He turned to look at Lily. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was staring out the viewport at the endless sea of stars, at the source of the broadcast. Her face was slack, her mouth slightly open. And she was humming. Not the single low note from before. Now it was a more complex tune, a melody of several notes, serene and beautiful, and utterly alien. She was harmonizing with the signal. "Lily," Jack whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Lily, look at me." She turned her head slowly, her eyes unfocused. "It's a pretty song, Daddy," she said, her voice a dreamy monotone. "It makes everything feel simple." The transmission ended. The screen went dark, but the hum in the cockpit of the rust bucket seemed louder than ever. They had escaped the station, but they had not escaped the cure. They were in a tiny boat on an ocean that was actively trying to dissolve them. Maria stared at her controls, her face ashen. Jack looked at his daughter, his beautiful, bright daughter, as the light in her eyes slowly, gently began to fade. The days that followed blurred into a single, continuous nightmare. The rust bucket was a tiny, sealed prison hurtling through an infinite hospital ward. Maria flew on autopilot, her face a grim mask, jumping the ship through short, frantic hyperspace, bursts with no destination in mind. To run was the only instinct left. But there was nowhere to run. The signal, the physician's lullaby, was everywhere. It permeated the fabric of space-time. It was as fundamental as radiation, as inescapable as the dark. They couldn't outrun it. They could only endure it. Jack tried to fight it. He lined the cockpit with spare insulation panels and deactivated the ship's external comms receiver, trying to create a Faraday cage, a shielded space. It helped a little. It turned the overwhelming hum into a dull, persistent headache, a background radiation of peace. His real battle was for Lily. He fought for her with stories and songs. He dug up old Earth nursery rhymes from the ship's databanks, singing them until his voice was raw. He told her stories about her mother, about brave knights and silly animals, about a green and blue world she had never seen. He tried to fill the silence with the messy, chaotic noise of being human. Sometimes for a moment he would break through. He'd see a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a ghost of her old smile. She would ask a question, a real question, not a flat statement. "Did Grandma really have a garden with real dirt, Daddy?" Those moments were oases in a desert of placid emptiness. They were what kept him going. But the quiet always returned. He would find her staring out the viewport, humming the physician's melody. He would call her name and she would turn to him with the polite indifference of a stranger. The cure was patient. It was relentless. One cycle, as he was telling her a story, she interrupted him. "Why are you shouting, Daddy?" she asked, her voice calm. He wasn't shouting. He was speaking in a normal voice. But to her, conditioned by the harmony of the void, his voice, his emotion, his very essence was a painful, discordant noise. He was the disease. He was the fever she was being cured of. The realization broke something deep inside him. He sought out Maria in the ship's tiny engine room. She was tinkering with the hyperdrive, her hands covered in grease. We can't keep this up, he said, his voice hollow. We're just delaying the inevitable. Maria didn't look up from her work. What do you want to do, Jackie? Find a nice, quiet asteroid and let it take us. Let them turn us into that. No, Jack said. But what's the alternative? We're two people in a tin can. The entire galaxy is against us. That's where you are wrong, she said finally, turning to face him. Her eyes had a wild, feverish gleam. The galaxy isn't against us. It doesn't care. It's a body, right? Well, a body has an immune system. But you know what else a body has? It has places the immune system can't reach. It has nooks and crannies. It has nook scars. What are you talking about? I've been scanning deep range, she said, pointing to a flickering monitor. The signal isn't uniform. There are pockets, voids within the void. Old black holes, chaotic nebulae. Systems so wrecked and violent that the physician's gentle little song gets torn to shreds. They're dead zones, places where the harmony can't reach. A tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in Jack's chest. So we can hide. Maybe, Maria said. Maybe we can do more than hide. Maybe we're not the only ones running. Maybe in those dark places the other fevers, the other infections are gathering. He didn't know if she was right. He didn't know if they were running toward a sanctuary or just a different kind of prison. But it was a direction. It was a purpose beyond just surviving another day. He went back to the cockpit. Lily was there, her small hand pressed against the cold viewport, tracing the constellations with her finger. The stars shone with a cold, serene clinical light. The light of a silent, healthy universe. Jack knelt beside her. He knew he was carrying the sickness. His love for her, his fear, his desperate hope. These were the symptoms. The very things he was trying to save were the source of the galaxy's diagnosis. Humanity had been declared a disease. The galaxy was wrong. It wasn't a disease. It was an epidemic. And they were the carriers. They were the last seeds of a beautiful, chaotic plague, looking for a dark place to take root and spread again. He took her hand. It felt cool in his. He began to sing an old song, a lullaby about stars being diamond sparks in the sky. His voice was a defiant noise in the great cosmic quiet. He would keep singing until his voice gave out, a single discordant note against the harmony, a fever refusing to break.